Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video will be a review of Weapons, which came out this weekend. So without delay, let's get into it. Let's review Weapons. So I want to start this by saying that I was a big fan of Zach Cregger's debut, Barbarian. I thought it was a really smart and funny horror movie. It really incorporated that mixture of horror and humor in a very smart way, and I thought that it was very well executed and had some really great and unique horror moments, and it felt like a really solid debut. And so I was excited when I heard about Weapons, and when I saw the trailer, I was very hyped, and there was a lot of hype built up, not just from fans, but also industry-wide, and a lot of expectations placed on this movie. Obviously, there had been the discussion of Jordan Peele getting rid of his agent when he lost the bidding war for this script. There was all sorts of discussions, of people that did read the screenplay saying that this was a great horror movie. It was going to be super exciting, lots of great twists and turns, and you weren't going to really be able to expect what was going to happen, right? So I came into this movie with pretty solid expectations. I never go into a movie necessarily expecting it to be my favorite horror movie of the year, my favorite movie of all time, or anything like that. I always somewhat moderate them. I always go in with a little bit of cautious optimism, even for a movie that I'm very certain I'll at least enjoy somewhat. And this was one that I definitely had very high expectations for, so I was very excited to go and see it in the theaters last night. These expectations were fortified by the pretty solid and positive reception for the most part from critics and audience members alike. It seemed like this was a movie that was definitely having a very positive reception just in general, and it seems like it'll be doing well at the box office as well. So all those things in mind going into the theater, I was pretty excited to see this movie, and I was really intrigued by the mystery at the core of the story that was presented in the trailers. So that was something that I was very, interested and excited to see how they were going to sort of execute it and how it was all going to unravel and things like that. So I go into it and I had pretty high expectations. The first thing that kind of put a crack into those expectations, to be honest, was right from the very beginning of the movie. I thought the opening was particularly weak. I thought the voiceover was very boring, bland, unnecessary, pointless, and annoying in a way that I thought really undermined the opening of the movie. They were trying to establish this mystery, really set it up in a solid way, and I just thought that that voiceover was really completely counterintuitive. It's already an element of movies I'm not really a huge fan of. It's very seldomly executed well, that opening voiceover. And this one in particular, I thought, showed a lot of the examples of why I don't like this in movies, this sort of trope of an opening. I think part of it is that you kind of spoil a lot of the things that are going to happen. Like, this little girl just told you, like, everything that was going to happen, almost basically the exact way it was going to resolve itself and things like that. And I just thought that that was really stupid. Why even put that in the movie at all? I think there could have been a much shorter version, maybe, of the voiceover that could still have worked to kind of just set up the mystery and get us straight into the story, but that's not what happened. It just went on and on and on, and it just felt really, just dumb, and I was just waiting for it to be over to finally get the movie to actually start. Then when we finally do get it to start, we realize that there's chapter titles, and you can kind of see, okay, this is going to be coming from a character's perspective, and you start to really understand the way that this is being set up, right? The way that everything's building towards the finale, even from the very beginning. It's immediately pretty obvious and right in front of your face. And this opening chapter was pretty well made for the most part. After we got away from the voiceover, we were able to establish the mystery in a captivating way. Julia Garner's performance is really awesome in this movie, and her character is really well written. She's a very multifaceted character. It's not just, oh, we all feel bad for her and she's dealing with this trauma and things like that. No, she's a very, like I said, multifaceted, very human type of character, very believable. She has all these flaws and foibles that make her realistic and make her interesting to watch and make us root for her and cheer for her. And we feel bad for her, obviously, as well, because of the extraordinary circumstances. We don't believe for a second that she had anything to do with what happened. But nonetheless, now she is in this position where she's being harassed by a local mob, essentially, and continually not able to do anything and move on because she can't even work her job until this bizarre circumstance sort of resolves itself. So this is someone who's very deeply caring, deeply emotionally attached to people that are in her life, and now she's dealing with this really sort of traumatic situation alone, and it sort of, brings out all these negative characteristics that she has in her personality. And so I think it's really captivating to watch, and she is a really relatable, flawed human character that we care about and we cheer for. And so that's a great setting up of a main lead character, even though that's kind of not really how the story is told, but that's kind of how we have the perception of it, is that she is going to be the one that we follow the story through. And if this was a traditional horror movie, that's sort of how it would have been done and kind of how I expected it to be done, to be honest. And while I do think this was a well-executed first chapter for the story, there was a lot of the problems that I have with the movie that started from here and were presented here in their most sort of pure form. So we have one of the main examples of a problem I have with the movie, which has to do with the way that the tonal sort of mishmash of the movie really doesn't land well for me personally, is the liquor store scene. So this is a scene where she's going to the liquor store once again, and we see a woman behind her, and we don't know who this woman is. We presume it's one of the parents that blames her for the missing children, and it's pretty well executed and hints, right? She's walking behind her, but she doesn't realize that there's someone following her, and we're just kind of waiting for it to sort of explode and to see how it's resolved, right? So this is a really great, tense piece of filmmaking to start off with. However, we then realize that's actually the partner of the person that she slept with, and so it turns into a comedic moment where she gets confronted by Donna. And I just think that I mean, it was kind of funny, it was unexpected, but at the end of the day, it was less satisfying than the pure horror that it would have been, or the sort of uncomfortableness of the missing child's parents. I think that would have been better executed. That's kind of how we were set up, and that's kind of how I feel like with this movie, we're set up to have a certain specific kind of expectation with the way that the mystery is presented to us, and then the way it's resolved is done much more comedically than it is through a sort of thriller frame or a horror frame, which is what I was expecting and which is what I was hoping for. And those flashes of horror and thriller and mystery are so well done that the comedy just kind of feels like a cop-out, which is unfortunate. Some of the other chapters then follow after this pretty well done, for the most part, Justine chapter. We have the Archer chapter, which has the pretty interesting dream sequence, which has obviously the gun that appears over the house, and there's a lot of people that have interpreted that in some way to sort of be discussing school shootings, and I kind of got that vibe for a split second, especially with the theme of schools and just the way everything was going. But very quickly, that sort of was dispelled from my mind. I don't believe that necessarily has anything to do with the movie. That's not how I sort of interpreted it in any way. I think it was more just this idea of weapons and the way that the kids are being weaponized. So that's what I think the gun necessarily represents, but there definitely has been a lot of discussion of like school shootings and things like that. And I'm definitely open to different interpretations. I haven't read a lot of people's theories on this movie, and I'll definitely have to, because I definitely think that there is some layers to maybe peel back on this movie. But overall, I did like this Archer chapter. It kind of unraveled the mystery, at least sort of at the beginning point of the unraveling, in a somewhat satisfying way, and made me want to know more. We then get to the Paul, the cop character, and I just thought that was just completely unnecessary. And I just felt like even though it was like decently executed, there was some good moments in there. I just thought, okay, this isn't really doing anything. I don't care about this character. It doesn't really tie into anything with the movie. It's kind of just pointless, and it's like, oh, we're trying to now tie all these characters in to eventually make them all connect at the end, have one big triumphant finale, which I get it, right? It definitely fits within like Zach Cregger, what I would expect from him. It kind of feels like almost a sketch comedy style thing, or even like an Arrested Development episode. Like we're trying to get all these characters together in the most ridiculous way possible, where each one's own bizarre little adventure now is all coming to a head all together in the most dramatically funny way possible. And that's the thing, it's all setting up to a humorous punchline at the end. Nothing is being built up for horror, and I think that that's what kind of leaves me unsatisfied throughout, is there is these little moments of horror, these little doses of it, but for the most part, everything is being set up to be a punchline for humor, not for horror or anything like that, or any kind of dread being built up in a sustained way. And I think Paul's sort of chapter is representative of the problems I have with the way that they do the nonlinear storytelling with the chapters. It's all representative of my problems with the storytelling on a fundamental level. And the druggy chapter sort of falls into that same category. It just kind of feels pointless. Yes, there's funny moments, and it's kind of funny how they tie things in a non-linear fashion. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember this thing I just saw. It's funny how it's been subverted and my expectations are different than what's the actual reality and things like that. But that only can sustain so much, and I think that it just feels more like a comedy movie in so many respects, and it kind of just pushes the horror to the side, which is really what I see in these two chapters and why I'm not a huge fan of either of these chapters. In the context of the entire story, I would have rather just continued to flip between Justine and Archer's story and seen how they paralleled each other and then eventually came together and understood this mystery. And I think that that's kind of what disappoints me about this movie, right? The whole thing, like everyone was hyping up, oh, Jordan Peele, right? He fired his agent because he didn't get the script, and everyone's hyping it up, everyone that read the screenplay. Oh, the twists and turns, you're never going to expect it. But to me, it more represents the tonal problems I have with the movie. To me, the humor in this kind of feels like that weird gang in 28 Years Later at the end, where it just kind of feels completely out of place. And I mean, it's funny and ridiculous. But at the same time, it's like this kind of does undermine horror. Luckily, it's kind of just at the end in that movie. But in this one, it keeps coming back out and just keeps being the main thing that they're trying to push. And a lot of it is funny. I'm not denying that. There's some really well executed humor here. But I think that some of it doesn't land very well. And it sort of undermines the horror at the core of the story and sort of makes it this weird mishmash that just feels tonally incoherent a lot of the times. It does not mesh as well as it does in Barbarian. The humor sort of overwhelms everything in the story, and everything that it's leading to, the whole mystery, is really just leading up to a comedic payoff. You know, Benedict Wong, I do want to praise him. There's some elements of this movie I do want to praise because I think he did a really good job with his portrayal. His character is really fun, and him and his husband and that whole scene was really interesting and just crazy, right? The execution on that was amazing, and they had some amazing effects. So that's one of the things that I really do love about this movie, and I cannot deny my love for the death scenes, and they're just so brutal, right? Some of the most brutal kills in horror movies that you'll definitely see this year or in the past like half decade. Just the scene in the kitchen with Benedict Wong's character and his husband. Holy cow, that one is intense. And then obviously she sends him off as a weapon, and then we have that whole scene at the gas station and things like that. But nonetheless, the special effects in this movie, I gotta give them all sorts of credit because they look amazing. The blood, the sort of skulls and the faces being just pounded down and destroyed, and just people being just completely eaten alive and things like that. Just it looks awesome, and I have to give my praise to that, and that is definitely one of the best elements of this movie, and the strongest element that makes it feel like a horror movie is the great effects. So I have to give all the praise to that 100%. We then eventually get to the Alex chapter of the story, which kind of brought me back into the story and brought me back into the mystery, and it was very bleak, and you really felt bad for this kid, and you thought that, you know, just in general, he was really a solid actor in this movie. The actor who portrayed Alex, his name is Kerry Christopher. I think he did an excellent job. I think recently we've really been having a lot of solid child actors in horror movies, which was always something that completely tanked a movie in a lot of, you know, just historically throughout the genre. They've had some very weak child actors, and that's always a tough thing to deal with in movies, and I understand that for casting and things like that. But he did an excellent job, and you really did care for this character, and you felt just horrible for what was happening. And this was one of the strongest moments in the movie because it really just felt super bleak and depressing. And then we get the realization that this is all leading up to the sort of humorous finale, and that's kind of unsatisfying. I mean, obviously, yes, I get what they're trying to go for, this ultimate catharsis, but we don't get enough of our main villain to care, right? I don't get enough of her to really care that she's getting this comeuppance, right? I mean, at the end of the day, do I really care that Gladys is dying? Like, yes, to a certain degree, like a small amount, but not as much as they obviously were expecting. So instead, it's just this ridiculous spectacle, which I'll admit was hilarious. Everyone in the theater was dying laughing. 100% well executed. Absolutely great bit. I love it. But it did kind of feel unsatisfying nonetheless, because I feel like this movie had so much more potential to realize something truly sort of transcendent. Instead, it's just a solid comedy with horror themes, if you will. Now, Gladys as a villain, I do think was creepy, and I think that she did a lot of really messed up things, and you do not like her, but we just don't get enough from her perspective to really cheer on that ending finale, which was, I will admit, really well executed. So I think if we got a Gladys chapter, it would have made that finale even more awesome, and maybe I would have cared more and I wouldn't have necessarily felt so unsatisfied. Instead, I kind of was just like, oh, that's funny, and then that was it, and I just move on. So overall, like I said, the twists, the turns, at the end of the day, it just kind of leaves the mystery and the thriller and the horror elements of the plot that I was really more captivated by. It just leaves those to the side and really just pushes up the humor and totally twists the humor to horror ratio all the way in favor of humor. To me, that's a bit disappointing, despite this movie being a very solidly made movie for the most part. And that is something I do want to point out is, even though I have problems with the storytelling, you can clearly tell that Zach Cregger is getting better and more confident and having more, his skills are developing in a much stronger way as a director. He just has to maybe improve as a screenwriter, have a better idea, maybe better execution just in general. Maybe the scope just kind of got out of whack here, but it's obvious that he has a lot of talent and his skill is starting to develop. And this is a better film than Barbarian on a technical level, even if I enjoy Barbarian more and feel it's more satisfying as a whole sort of project than this one, which I thought was a little bit underwhelming. Now, that being said, I also have to praise the acting. That's another huge element that's positive for this movie. Julia Garner finally gets to act in a good horror movie. Good enough, at least compared to her previous movies that she's had to deal with. Apartment 7A, Wolfman, both were just completely underwhelming movies that she did a great job in, I thought she's a really good actress, but she's just been kind of let down, and I think this one will start to sort of give her her props, right? Like, horror fans will now be able to truly appreciate her, and I think she'll start to become more of a Scream Queen when we talk about Scream Queens, like in that sort of discussion, which is awesome. I also think Josh Brolin did a great job as well. I'm a fan of his work as well. So yes, there's definitely some positives you can take away from this movie. As someone who's been appreciating Julia Garner's work in horror over the last couple of years, I was so looking forward to this movie because I was like, finally, I think that she's going to be in a good horror movie. And I do think she does really good work with her role. Even if this movie isn't as great as I was hoping, I'm still so glad she was able to be in a movie like this. So overall, I am, I'm mixed with my reception to this movie. There's definitely a lot of positive elements, but when they kind of cohere together, it's less than the sum of its parts, which is disappointing. And I think if it would have leaned more into the mystery, thriller, horror angle, we could have had something truly great. Instead, we just get something that's pretty good, okay. It's a solid movie. It's not going to be near the bottom of the list for like worst horror movies of the year, and it's not going to be at the top of the list for best horror movies of the year either, which is fine if a little disappointing. So with that being said, that's my review for Weapons. Thank you all for watching to the end of the video. If you liked this video, please hit like. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell for notifications if you want to see when my next videos come out. Again, thank you all for watching to the end, and I'll see you next time.